We just installed a brand new lift kit on this 2020 Lexus GX460 behind us, and we're going to walk you through the process. Let's go. All right, so behind us is the Lexus GX460. This is our 2020. We bought it recently, so it's not new, but it's kind of a new model year. We went ahead and installed a lift kit on it, but I'll explain kind of what our goal here was. We wanted something very capable. We wanted to be able to put bigger tires on, but we have a baby on the way, so we also don't want this thing to be an overkill build either. So kind of a sleeper off-roader, so to speak. So we are keeping the side steps on. We're not going to put rock sliders, for instance, just to make it usable and functional for our purposes, at least for the next couple years. But we did want the suspension to be more capable. We did want to fit bigger tires on there in case you get into a bind or something. The vehicle can be more capable instead of minivan, height. So what did we do? Well, on the front, we did a Dobinsons IMS kit that has no reservoirs, so it's a full coilover. And then we did Dobinsons billet upper control arms, which came out recently, I think last year. They look amazing. On top of that, we did Dobinsons MRR, which do have reservoirs, but on the rear, and those are just shocks. Then we did, obviously, there are springs in the rear as well, and that's what gives you the lift. And then the biggest thing is this vehicle comes with KDSS, and some 4Runners do too. So if you have one of those vehicles, then this video might help you out, showing you what we did. But basically, we installed a treaty yoke spacer kit. Once you lift this vehicle, the KDSS cannot reach the sway bar anymore. So the spacer kit gets you all back within kind of specs and makes that whole system functional again, so you don't have to delete the KDSS system out of the vehicle, which we like. I've grown to like KDSS a lot, actually, driving this now. So we kept that intact, and then on top of that, we added a Dobinsons panhard bar on the rear and took out the old one. So kind of a full suspension overhaul, but it's 2.5 inches higher, kind of a sleeper off-roader. It doesn't look like a minivan anymore, but at least it's more functional. And if you actually look at the components, somebody would notice that it's actually a fairly capable off-roader now. Then for tires, we went with Bridgestone Revo 3s. These are their AT tire, 285/70/17. And then we went with Brink wheels to combine them with. And so it got a whole new look, runs great, but we're gonna walk you through how we did all this, show you some of the steps, and hopefully by the end of it, you feel kind of empowered to do it yourself, should you want to. Let's get into it. Remove the plastic transition piece from the front bumper to the skid. That'll give you better access to the skid when it comes time to remove it. We were missing a bolt, so you will have to remove one extra bolt. Should be 4 total. We're going to pop the clips on the splash guards so that we can get full access and have some room to work. You can use a trim removal tool like we're doing. Everything pops off pretty easy. Next, we're going to pull the cotter pin on the stock upper control arm ball joint nut. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove the brake line mounting brackets. There's a bolt on the top of the control arm there. You can also remove the one on the side here. That just gives everything some play. You will notice we put the bolts back into place just so you don't lose them. Next, we're using a 19 to remove the nut on the ball joint. Alright, so now we're using a 19 ratchet wrench. We're going to loosen the upper through bolt on the back side. This is on the side facing the rear of the vehicle. And it's a very, very long bolt, so try not to lose this nut. And we're going to slide the bolt all the way out. We'll show you that on the other side. If you are trying to free up the bolt for the ball joint through the spindle, you can hit from the side here. You can pry using a pry bar here. If you have a replacement castle nut, you can hit the castle nut here. You could also torch it. We're going to do our best to pop it up. There it is. And now you can release the actual castle nut because you know that this is loose. And that play will allow you to slide the through bolt out a little bit smoother, a little easier. If you need to bend this flat piece of sheet metal up here to get access to the head of the bolt and slide it out, feel free. But basically you got to slide the whole bolt all the way through and out. Alright, so now we are going to pull the through bolt through the stock upper control arm and slide it all the way through. And you'll notice that piece of sheet metal there sometimes gets in the way. Feel free to bend that back to give you some more play if you need to. You can use pretty much anything, flathead, pry bar, whatever, but just make your job easier. And just like that, the bolt is slid out. Take the control arm out, and just be careful as you're pulling the bolt out to not catch any lines or anything. Alright, so we've got the billet uppers. We want to show you, you have to get these to a certain length, and that's 39 millimeters. And that is from the base here of the flattest part right here versus the flattest part of the actual billet arm. And so roughly it's like 1.5 inches, but obviously depending what you're measuring with, make sure it's 39 millimeters exactly. And that's a good starting point. Both arms, sides of the arms have to be done that way. Now that we have it where we want it, go ahead and tighten the nuts. There it is. And obviously you're going to retighten these once you slide the bolt through them in the vehicle, but we just don't want this sliding around and moving much until we get it in the vehicle. What I'm going to show here is the Dobinsons kit comes with some, I guess you could say, inserts or spacers for the control arms. So you'll want to put them on that inside before you attach the bolt to the nut. Now we're just seating the ball joint into the spindle. And with that holding everything, we're going to go ahead and begin loosening up the strut for removal. Keep in mind there's 3 bolts on the strut, 1 on the back side. As you transition to the bottom, we're loosening the bottom through bolt that goes through the shock. If you're having a hard time, just hammer the bolt out. Loosening the bolts on the lower control arms here. And this is just going to prevent the bushings from binding and allow some play. And then we can swivel it down and slide that strut out. Here we're releasing the bolts from the sway bar. We are now releasing the bolts on the bottom of the control arm where it mounts to the brake assembly, and what that's going to allow is it to separate the control arm to swing down and get the strut out pretty easy. We released the sway bar bracket here. It's got a hook there, so you got to slide that out and it frees everything up. Alright, now you can see the amount of play we got, and that'll allow us to pull the whole strut out nice and easy. We've swung the lower control arm out the way. Now we're just going to feed the strut up through the bottom. And then you can get a couple nuts started at the top to hold it all together. Using your jack, you can push the control arm back up, get everything aligned, and slide your lower shock bolt through. And just that bolt there, that'll hold the whole control arm back together while we reattach it to the brake assembly. Reattaching the bolts for the lower control arm back to the brake assembly and the lower ball joint. These are at a size 19. Cool. Alright, you want to hook the tabs at the bottom of the sway bar end, and then you can kind of rotate the bar into place to try to get the bolt started. There's a cutout at the top so that you can pry and kind of move it along that guide. Pretty sure Lexus did that on purpose. Here we go. That helps bring the top one more into play and helps you align everything. And then just torque it all down. Now we're tightening up the cam tab nuts and bolts on the lower control arm. Tightened up the bottom shock bolt. Now you can tighten up the top 3 bolts on the top of the strut. Now we're reattaching our brake lines. You'll have to use a step drill and bore out the top bracket, and then use the provided bolt and hardware from Dobinsons, and then it'll attach to your control arm like so. Really nice. Here you go. Now we're putting the hardware provided by Dobinsons for the upper control arm to tighten everything up. Same thing on the other side. using the provided hardware from Dobinsons, and this will tighten up those threads. Now we're installing the Treaty Oak KDSS spacer. And in the kit comes longer hardware as well. And with that hardware, you'll be able to reach the threaded holes. So we're just hand tightening the bolts to the KDSS spacer, and then we'll tighten everything up. All right, so using a jack, we are pushing up on the sway bar, getting the spacer to align with the holes. These are threaded holes. We hand tightened it, and now we're impacting everything and tightening it all up. There it is. Torquing down the shock bolt to the torque specs. All right, so transitioning to the rear, you're going to want to loosen, but you do not have to remove your upper link bolts up here. You'll want to do the panhard bar. You'll want to do the lower link as well, and that'll allow some sway along with the KDSS mounting bracket. Since we're going to replace those with Treaty Oak anyway, you'll want to release that as well. And then definitely support the axle using some sort of a jack if you're on the ground. Because you'll have to remove the shock, and that's when this will definitely have a lot of movement. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt holding the bottom of the shock. Don't forget to also release tension on the ABS lines. We're going to remove this bracket here to give the cable some play. Now we're going to loosen the top nut on the shock. In case you need more room, you can feel free to bend that pinch weld, but we seem to have enough space this time around. If the shock starts spinning, you may have to grab it with some channel locks or a vice grip. And a reminder, we're using a hydraulic jack to hold the whole axle, but if you're working in your garage and you're releasing this, you're going to want to put something underneath to keep the axle from moving too much once you release this shock. All right, now remove your shock. Then just jump cut to the release of the shock. Here we go. All right, now with the jack that you used to hold the axle, you can kind of release it, let the axle drop, and that'll give you enough play in the spring to pull the whole thing out.
Now let's take a look at the new springs here. We got these custom colored red. Compared to the old springs, a hell of a difference.
Now we're going to slip in the new spring. We're reusing the top kind of bump stop boot of the spring. All right, once you have your spring installed, make sure you seat it properly. There it is. These are MRRs for the rear of the GX. All right, so we've attached the MRR rear shock to the base here, and we are working on getting the bushings situated on top. Using the jack, we're pumping up the shock, bringing the axle up so that we can actually slide the threads through the bushing. All right, as you are tightening the shock, you'll notice that the shock will begin to kind of free spin. There's some flat sides to this Dobinsons shock that you can attach some pliers to, or some channel locks. We're using a rag just to protect the paint coat. So you kind of grab that, and then you can get your final tightening turns on that top nut. Keep in mind the bottom of the shock is being held at the base here, so everything is still attached. We are on the driver's side, and the reservoir, the brackets that came from Dobinsons, there's 2 holes in them, and on the frame there was a hole as well, and that was threaded. So we found a bolt that fits there, used one there to hold it, trimmed some of the plastics here, and then kind of routed the cable over. And so you want to make sure the reservoir cable isn't rubbing on anything here. And now that we have it in place, technically you can punch another hole and use the secondary hole to really secure this thing better if you want to. But the biggest thing here too is make sure this plastic up here is also not rubbing on the hose. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten the bottom. Is that a 19? 18. Okay. We are removing the pan-hard bolts because we are replacing the pan-hard bar. Keep in mind the suspension is installed, so that's what's holding everything together. We also have a safety jack down here to keep the axle from shifting too much. Removing the other end of the pan-hard bar. We've just attached the Dobinsons adjustable pan-hard bar on. While it was on the ground, we went ahead and equaled the length of the stock one for now. We'll see how the axle sits. If we need to adjust it, we will. But coming along. Now we're attaching the Treaty Oak KDSS spacers. Very nice. All right, so that wraps up this video. I really like the kit. It rides unbelievably better than it did before. Again, this has 70,000 miles. It's a 3-year-old vehicle, really not that much rust. So the benefits of doing this kind of stuff on vehicles that are fairly new-ish shows, because your whole install is gonna be faster, and you can kind of touch up things if you see rust collecting anywhere. But obviously if you have an older vehicle, this might be a little bit more of a battle for you. But besides that, hopefully you learned something, feel empowered to do it yourself. Without further ado, thanks for watching, and see you next time.